Good. I think we can wait a couple of more minutes, or actually we can start now. Good. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our event, Economic Crime, a Consensus Issue. My name is Maria Nizzaro. I am a research fellow at RUSI's Center for Financial Crime and Security Studies, and it is my pleasure to chair today's webinar. Before getting started, I would like you to keep in mind a couple of housekeeping points and know that a full webinar, including a Q&A session, is going to be recorded. If you want to ask a question, please pose it in writing in the Q&A box, and do please include your name and your organization. And if you want to boost a question that has already been posed, do please make use of the upvote function. Most of you will be familiar with RUSI's CFCS and our work, but for those of you who are not, we're a specialist program within RUSI on the intersection between finance and security. We aim to equip the international community with knowledge, tools, and ideas to understand, identify, and disrupt the threats of illicit finance. One of our many research projects focuses on the tracking and monitoring of the implementation of the Economic Crime Plan, which in 2019 sets a series of action to ensure that we reduce the attractiveness of the UK as a global hub for illicit finance. However, over the past weeks, will day, one day atmosphere has worried advocates that economic crime is not potentially given the priority it deserves. From ensuring greater transparency to guaranteeing that supervision and enforcement match the scale of the challenge, to stepping up our response to fraud and international malign influence, there is a lot to do to protect our society from the harm of economic crime and to protect Britain's reputation as a trusted jurisdiction. Fighting economic crime, however, should not be a political matter, not something that divides political opinion. Economic crime should be a cross-party unifying foe. To discuss this critical element, I am delighted to be joined today by a fantastic cast of experts. We have Kevin Hollinrake from the Conservative Party and currently a member of the Treasury Select Committee and co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Fair Business Banking. Baroness Kramer, Treasury spokesperson for Lib Dem since 2015 and currently co-vice chair of the APPG on anti-corruption and responsible tax. Pat McFadden, Labour Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and Alison Thulis, Shadow SNP spokesperson for Treasury, as well as a member of the Treasury Select Committee. Welcome all, it's a pleasure to have you all here. We will start with the speakers' opening remarks on the importance of economic crime as a consensus issue, and then we will move to the discussion. As ever, we welcome your thoughts, comments, and questions as participants in today's webinar, so do please make good use of the Q&A box. And I will do my best, obviously, to cover as much of your input as possible. So subject to the degree of your engagement, we will aim to finish around 10:30 UK time. With that said, I will pass the floor to the speakers. I would actually like to start with Kevin Hollinrake, who called a very important urgent questions session in late January that sets a series of events that finally led to the Prime Minister confirming that we are going to see an economic crime bill in the next parliamentary session. So Kevin, I hand over the floor to you for your opening remarks. Sorry, Kevin, you're on mute.
Sorry, I thought somebody was doing that for me. I do apologise. Well, thank you, Maria, and thank you to RUSI for all the work you do in this space. My UQ is one of many different things that help to push forward the cause of an economic crime bill. Because, as you say, it is a cross-party thing, and on my side of the house, lots and lots of people want to see this brought forward. To put this in context, I don't know if how many people in the audience have watched a fantastic miniseries on Netflix called Ozark. And it sort of follows the fortunes of a wealth manager, a financial advisor, who is actually laundering huge amounts of money, billions of pounds, billions of dollars, for a Mexican drug cartel, a brutal Mexican drug cartel. And because the point with all this is you have to do something with your ill-gotten gains. If you're going to carry out crime, sell drugs, traffic people, extort, whatever you're going to do, you can't just simply put it in the bank, because somebody's going to ask you, where do you get that money from? You can't go and buy a car or a yacht or a house. Somebody's going to ask you where you got that money from. So you've got to do something with it. You've got to launder that money. And I think people often see money laundering, when you talk about it, as very much a white collar crime. It doesn't affect everyday people, but it absolutely does. If you are worried about your kids being sold drugs, if you're worried about the small boats crisis coming over the ocean, if you were over the English Channel, if you're worried about Russian kleptocrats hiding the money all around the world, the impoverishment of nations, you should be worried about this. So we've got to really make the case. This is such an important piece of legislation. Just on that people trafficking issue, Paul Stanfield, who's the chap who oversees organised crime at Interpol, says in terms of people trafficking, the way you're going to crack that is all about the money. To tackle organised crime, you need to go after the money. Now, if you can hide the money, people can't go after the money. They can't find where that money is coming from and where it's going to go. So this is why we have to act. And it's not all massive. It's not all massive drug dealers in Mexico. This is low-level crime as well, or relatively low-level crime. There was a chap in Leeds, a businessman apparently called Mani Hussain, who's had an unexplained wealth order, £10 million of assets confiscated because he was acting for relatively low-level organised criminals in the UK. This happens everywhere. So this should be the kind of bleeding obvious in terms of bringing this forward. This economic crime bill can tie up in so many different areas. And you're absolutely right what you say, Maria. This isn't just about cleaning up the system. It's about really the UK's reputation, because the UK has some very lax rules that facilitate money laundering, the hiding of these ill-gotten gains. So, and the reason I'm particularly interested in this as well, because I think it's so important. My background is very much small and medium-sized businesses, and I think for people to be engaged, to start to set up a business, they need to feel the system is fair. It's not rigged. And I think at the moment, too many people think the game is simply rigged. So, so the government's been talking about bringing forward this economic crime bill since about 2015. But thanks to Lord Agnew, who recently resigned, part of his resignation statements said that the government's postponing again the economic crime bill. So, so I think his action more than anything precipitated this clamour to get this stuff done, as well as the Russian crisis and all that kind of stuff. So, so what's it going to contain? The bill is going to contain three really important elements: a requirement for companies to prevent corporate crime. So I feel it's a preventive offence, criminal offence, preventing corporate crime. A register of overseas entities, which will mean we can find out for the first time who owns lots of properties in the UK, because that's a key place to hide your money. And more clarity, making Companies House a regulator, not just a register. So making it more difficult to hide the ownership of a company behind Companies House, so people actually interrogate who owns things, so you can see where that money is coming from. A couple of other things that need to go in there that aren't currently proposed to go in there. Whistleblower legislation. It's absolutely critical we protect whistleblowers, because that's where the information comes from. Without the intelligence, you can't prosecute the crime. So we need whistleblower protection. And again, we've fallen behind in terms of whistleblower protection in the UK, and more resources for our crime enforcement agencies. But if you want to know more about this in detail, read the Treasury Select Committee report on it, which was published last week, and it really goes in great detail about this. A fascinating read, and really ticks all the boxes. But hopefully, now that, as you said, the government's decided to bring this forward, we'll see in the next parliamentary session, so 2022, 2023, we'll see this legislation brought forward, and we'd all welcome it and watch its passage through the houses very carefully.
Thank you, Kevin. I think that we're going to all look very carefully if it's going to be included. You mentioned whistleblower protection. Obviously, this leads me to ask Susan to make her opening remarks, because I know that it's an issue quite dear to you.
Yes, you're right. I mean, I have a private member's bill in front of the House to create an office of the whistleblower, because we make whistles martyrs. I mean, we traduce them. That's when they're absolutely vital. And I think Kevin and I see exactly eye to eye on this particular issue. And if the government doesn't put it in the economic crime bill, it better choose another route and choose it fast. It's welcome to pick up and rewrite my private member's bill, quite frankly. But we'll see where that goes. Look, I think the government will argue that it's taken some steps to deal with what I would call conventional organised crime and its money laundering, with things like the Proceeds of Crime Act. But what it hasn't done is focus on the kleptocrats and the oligarchs And we've seen that just come so much to the fore as the Americans have looked in great shock and said, but economic sanctions against Putin and his henchmen aren't going to really work because the henchmen all found ways to operate through the London laundromat in a way that in the UK is entirely legal. So we've got to deal with this issue. And I think it's absolutely essential that we get that economic crime bill coming through as quickly as possible. It must deal with the exposure of the beneficial owners of UK property, because that's, as Kevin says, exactly the way in which most people choose to hide money. Actually, Layla Moran, one of my colleagues, has a the Commons End private members bill that catches that issue, so the government could move more quickly. But I am quite worried. There's a bill going through, just finishing in the Lords now. It's been through the Commons that deals with free ports, and within that, there is a requirement for free ports to have a register that's of the beneficial owners of businesses that operate in free ports. Free ports being notorious for crime because the customs and tax declarations that expose things aren't there. It's absolutely notorious and tax advantaged in the way that we've set up free ports. But not a public register. And I hope very much this is not the government retrenching. And I know I can rely on the three people here to raise that issue and make it clear, because the government has said, you know, going back to George Osborne, public registers are absolutely key. And it brings us to the kind of capacity of our enforcement bodies. I mean, they absolutely struggle. So they're under-resourced, they don't have the capacity, and that's why they need civil society, activists, whistleblowers to all play a role in this, and why the public registers are absolutely critical. And I think there are two more critical things. The issue of the kind of fraud that people experience day to day will undoubtedly be addressed in the economic crime bill. We have to replace action fraud with something that actually works. Collects data, does nothing. Absolutely fundamental problem. But also, and this is a point that others in this group have made, it's the networks and it's the enablers. You can't just go after the particular oligarch or kleptocrat or crime boss or whatever else. And that includes, you know, the legal firms, the estate agents, the accountants. And it's why the failure to prevent that Kevin talked about, I think, is so absolutely crucial. While we're at it, we need to end that embarrassment of golden visas, which basically says anyone who's rich can come here. And at some point, sometime in the next 15 years, we might take a look at whether or not you're a suitable person. So it's a very, very full agenda. But I suspect as you talk to all of us, it's very much a common agenda. The government also tends to talk the right way, but it's getting action and quickly.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, absolutely. It is a lot of things all comprised under the umbrella of economic crime, and it is both domestically, internationally. There is a lot to do there. Pat, would you like to make your opening remarks on this issue?
Sure. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Rusi, and to my fellow panelists this morning. The first thing to say about this issue is it isn't just an issue of money and finance and tax revenue, though it's certainly all of those things. This is an issue of national security, and it should be treated as such. That's why Rusi is such an appropriate host today. These two things obviously come together right now in the issue around Ukraine. There's already been significant debate about how effective sanctions can be in the UK when so much of the wealth associated with people close to the Putin regime is tied up in property here in the UK. And as Susan said, there's a very well developed group of law firms, consultancy firms, trusts, PR firms, what you might call the enablers, who are ready to help these people and to issue lawsuits against those who try to expose them. So the question for us is, how can we crack down effectively on the finances of oligarchs when the UK has been such a welcome home to them over the years? Some of you will be aware the Centre for American Progress recently wrote, "Uprooting the Kremlin-linked oligarchs will be a challenge, given the close ties between Russian money and the ruling Conservative Party, the press and its real estate and financial industry. And it proposed creating a joint US-UK working group to prod stronger action from the UK government. Now, money laundering and fraud are issues for the United States as well. But it is interesting that they are now highlighting the UK as a weakness. The Foreign Secretary, just a couple of weeks ago, said there would be a new sanctions regime and that it would be in place by the 10th of February. Now, I don't think that's in place. I don't know where that is. I understand the Foreign Secretary is going to Russia imminently in the next day or two. She's going there without this new sanctions regime being in place when we were told it would be by tomorrow. The steps being called for have been quite well rehearsed in parliamentary debates. They are, of course, the Registration of Overseas Entities Bill to show us the true nature of who owns property. They are the Companies House reform to make it a regulator and not just a library. I noticed that Oliver Burrow, in a video posted on RUSI's own website, has recently registered a company called Crooked Crook Limited, and nobody's batted an eyelid. And in recent days, it's been reported that 761 companies are registered at a flat above a food takeaway shop in Somerset. And this kind of thing shows how wide open we are. Proper reforms long overdue. There has been a consultation, but we haven't yet had the legislation. Thirdly, there is, of course, the Intelligence and Security Committee's report on Russia, which is now published approaching 2 years ago, and on a number of issues that were highlighted in that report: cybersecurity, the London laundromat, the weaknesses in unexplained wealth orders, visa overhaul, and many other issues. There's been no action at all. So that is also another big weakness. And then there's the failure to prevent offence that Kevin and Susan Kramer mentioned. Now, Lord Agnew said part of his reason for going in his resignation speech was that the government had dropped the economic crime bill once again. There have been indications since then that it might be revisited. We certainly hope it will be, and that it will be in the next Queen's speech. And this is where I have to be slightly partisan in this. The Prime Minister does give the impression after 2.5 years in office of not taking this as a priority, not doing anything in the economic measures that the UK needs. The Russia report has been largely ignored as an inconvenience. And of course, we've still got large amounts of money around the Conservative Party coming from people who have been associated with Russia and sometimes with the regime in the past. And it's against that background that all this talk of sanctions over Ukraine has to be seen. We've also, of course, got the large-scale abuse of the COVID schemes. This has been debated in Parliament recently. We've had 5.8 billion estimated to have been lost in the grant schemes. That's mainly furlough and eat out to help out, of which the government has said it hopes to recover 1.5 over the next 2 years, leaving the 4.3 billion that we've been debating in Parliament recently. And then there's the bounce back loans, where estimates vary. Department of Business at first said 4.9 billion. That's been revised down a bit as an estimate, but it featured quite heavily in Lord Agnew's speech. Now, the rationale, of course, is there was pressure to get money out of the door, and there was pressure to get money out of the door. Of course, everybody accepts, without that help, many businesses and individuals would have gone under. But I don't accept that that's the reason for not having the most basic controls in place, like checking whether or not a company had ever traded, or checking duplicate applications, and even these things weren't in place. And that's where the COVID fraud and the Companies House reform comes together, because it's the same system that's allowed the proliferation of shell companies that allowed people to register all these companies and claim bounce back loans, sometimes within a day or two of doing it. The other part of this to mention is the effect of fraud on our constituents. The Treasury Select Committee that was report that was published recently highlighted that around a third of crime that's reported now is fraud. The ONS have got figures out today showing there are 14,000 victims a day. All of us who are MPs on this call will have dealt with constituents who've been victims of scams, people who've lost their life savings through one in my constituency, someone phoned pretending to be from the bank, persuades the person to transfer a lot of money, and then they don't realize that they've been the victim of a fraud. So this is an issue of policy, of foreign policy, of national security. It's all of those things. It's also a real consumer protection issue for our constituents too. We've proposed having an illicit finance task force to make sure the UK is not a welcome home for the proceeds of looting and kleptocracy. We've got a world-leading financial services sector. It is in no one's interest for that to have the reputation of being a place of lax standards and poor and weak regulation. And we'll announce more details on that soon. But in the meantime, it is really urgent, both as a matter of ensuring value for money and for national security, that the Prime Minister and the government don't delay further, that they do commit to this economic crime bill and it's brought forward as soon as possible.
Thank you, Pat. And definitely on the US-UK issue, Brucey, we have launched in July a task force for a transatlantic response to illicit finance. And we're talking about how, before looking abroad, we actually have to fix the home base. Now, with all these issues that we have mentioned, I'm super pleased that we have not one but two members of the Treasury Select Committee here today. So, Alison, would you like to make your opening remarks?
Thanks very much, Maria, and it's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm grateful to Lucy for putting this together because it could not be more topical, really. While economic crime is by no means new, we're very, very far away from dealing with it, and the speed and complexity of economic crime really has been accelerating, and that was highlighted in the Treasury Select Committee report. It's on an upward trend, and more concerningly, I think we found that it doesn't seem to be a priority for UK law enforcement, and it also doesn't appear to be a very strong priority for government. And really the COVID frauds are just the latest aspect of a wider issue. And all of this, of course, has an impact on the UK's international reputation. The point about oligarchs was mentioned earlier on. And I'll speak a little bit about Scottish limited partnerships later, obviously a problem where it looks as though it's an impact on Scotland's reputation, but of course Scotland has nothing to do with that because it is a matter reserved to the UK government. And this is broadly a consensus issue. We've had debates in Parliament, we've had people coming together from all sides on this issue, and I think more so perhaps than in the 7 years that I've been in Parliament, and certainly when we were taking evidence in the Treasury Select Committee and putting together that report, there was a very strong consensus as well. Some reports people will appreciate, you get a lot more to and fro between members of the committee about which amendments go where and how we agree things, but there was a huge and strong consensus in the committee on this particular issue and the means of tackling it. And I think that means really that it's a problem that the UK government cannot continue to ignore or to kick into the long grass. There's been lots of things said about, when parliamentary time allows, or we'll get to the economic crime bill eventually, and all those kind of things. And that really no longer holds water, I think. And we've already had a number of missed opportunities where there could have been reform. So the Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Bill 2018 left some gaps that could have been filled at that time. Civil society were calling for those gaps to be filled, MPs were calling for those gaps to be filled, they haven't been filled. Unexplained wealth orders, which were brought in with great fanfare, nobody has been given an unexplained wealth order in the past couple of years. There was 6, there was 3, and then there's been nothing since. They're clearly needing review, they're clearly not working as intended. The Registration of Overseas Entities Bill, I sat in the Joint Committee with the Lords. Again, we made strong recommendations to government. We took lots of very compelling evidence on this. We're still waiting for that Register of Overseas Entities. And there's, of course, been finance bills regularly as well, where means could have been put in place to tighten things up. So there's been lots of opportunities there, and I think it's not really tenable for the government to continue to ignore this issue, particularly when people from all parties now are coming together and on this issue. And to mention Scottish limited partnerships specifically, there's been a problem ongoing with these for years. They have been used as a means of serious international money laundering, of moving ill-gotten gains around the place, of trying to bust sanctions, all kinds of different malicious activities, nefarious activities. And I pay tribute to Richard Smith and David Leask, who've done a huge amount of journalism on this in Scotland. They're still full of loopholes to avoid transparency. The notion of having a person with significant control still doesn't really mean anything because it's been moved around and evaded wherever they can. And for me, the key to all of this, this accountability, this fraud, this means of shifting money around through the UK, not even in the UK, just through the UK, is Companies House. And Companies House at the moment is a wide open door through which criminals and fraudsters are traipsing through on a daily basis. The register at the moment, as everybody will know, is absolute guff. You can register anything on it and it just doesn't matter because it isn't a checking service, it's merely a registration service. I mean, Pat called it a library, it's not even a very good library because everything's just scattered all over the place and makes no actual sense. And Martin Swain, the Director of Strategy, Policy and External Communications at Companies House, has said, even though sometimes we know that the information is incorrect or potentially fraudulent, the registrar is legally required to register it. And the Companies House website says that Companies House doesn't verify the accuracy of the information filed, as a little disclaimer at the top of the page. And if that's your register, that makes absolutely no sense, and it absolutely has to be tackled. And for me, making that register as tight as possible would have a huge impact on fraud and on the ability of people to launder money through the UK. And that would be my big takeaway from what we can do to tighten up on fraud and on economic crime more broadly.
Thank you. Thank you very much. These are all, from all your opening remarks, I'm super pleased to actually, the main point that I draw is that there is a consensus and that economic crime is a priority and it needs to be tackled. But at the moment, we're not seeing the response that we actually really need to protect both our society, our national security and our reputation at home and abroad. I see questions popping up already in the questions, like in the chat box, so I'm very pleased about that. I will start with a question by Patrick Curry. I'm going to try to broaden it a bit more, and I will ask to Kevin. Patrick writes, the reports on the DLT by the CSA, so Mark Walpole, and then by Lord Holmes, focus on public goods, catalyze much collaborative activity across industry. However, the CEO Cabinet Office and CSAG recognized that government organizations needed to collaborate more effectively. That didn't happen. Where is good parliamentary focus that could help encourage much greater collaboration and coordination to enable progress? And I would ask more generally, how could Parliament cooperate more and ensure that there is also collaboration across the different agencies that are tasked with tackling economic crime?
Yeah, thanks. A very good question. And this does cut across so many different departments. It's absolutely true. The Cabinet Office does have a role in trying to be that organisation that draws all the different things together. I think this is one of the frustrations of Lord Agnew, actually, why he resigned, because there was a lot of expertise within the Cabinet Office on this area, but he felt some of that expertise was being ignored. So I think, yes, there needs to be a greater focus on it and the importance of it. And Lord Agnew was very clear he didn't feel we were appropriately prioritising this issue. So I think that's starting to change. I think lots of the work that's gone on over the last few weeks, particularly, and the Russian-Ukraine crisis has really focused attention on this. So it's good to see the Prime Minister saying he will bring it forward in the next session. We will obviously look at that very closely. But some other things in terms of collaboration was in the Treasury Select Committee report. We've got a whole raft of different agencies responsible for economic crime. And we posed the question really in the report, should that be drawn together in a single law enforcement agency, or was it more somebody with umbrella responsibility for all those particular issues? So yeah, I mean, I think the other thing I think we've got to say, I mean, part of the reason we don't focus on this, well, one thing, as I said before, bleeding obvious we do this, but so why haven't we? And I think there's a couple of key reasons why this hasn't been brought forward or prioritised in the past. It's not seen as that populist. I think probably, you know, as politicians, we're bound to want to bring forward policies that the public are interested in. That's what democracy. But I think we've got to make the case why this is really important. I don't think we've successfully done that in the past. The other thing is the Treasury. To me, Bill Shankly used to say before he sent his players out on the pitch when he was manager of Liverpool, the score's 0-0, don't let it get any worse. And I think the Treasury is a bit like that. You know, anything you do, you turn one dial, this dial over here could raise, and there's unintended consequences. So there's worry if you bring things in like failure to prevent offence, which is really important and could have helped with some of that bounce back loan fraud, for example. I think we would have put the onus on the banks to make sure they were stopping fraud or put the controls in place. So I think there's a worry that we, you know, if we do this stuff, maybe it'll deter investment, that kind of stuff, which is a rational concern. But I think we're wrong. I think we're too soft. I think Pat mentioned things like in the online safety bill, you know, paid for advertising. It's not currently in the draft bill. So we would allow Google and Facebook and others to continue to take money from advertisers that they don't know who they are, to put adverts up there. I mean, crazy. I spoke to Google yesterday and they said, no, we're fine with that. We can do the verification. So why have we been reluctant to do it? Why are we reluctant to put this legislation in place? Why are we reluctant to prosecute the promoters of tax avoidance schemes? Why are we like that? We've just got to get tougher and stop thinking, oh my God, if we do this, you know, our economy will fall apart. Absolutely opposite. It will encourage investment.
Thank you. I think that one of the questions that as a civil society we are asking, we're very happy that Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary, Chancellor, they all made a commitment about seeing the ECB, the Economic Crime Bill, in next parliamentary session. However, we are still a bit fuzzy about the content, as Kevin was saying. Pat, there is a question actually that is about the ECB, the Economic Crime Bill. So my first question is, what do you think should be absolutely present in the bill? And then a question from Ed Taylor, how will the bill deal with exposing the ultimate beneficial owners and eliminating the complex overseas legal structures that obfuscate the true beneficial ownership currently existing?
You want me to take that one? Yeah. Well, in terms of what would be in the bill, I think we've discussed a number of the things this morning. The exposure of the real owners of property. At the moment, you could just register it in the name of a shell company and you don't know who owns the shell company and where is that registered, and it goes on, and it would take a great deal of diligence to go through layer and layer of this to find the real owner. So we've got to get through that to make that a lot simpler. That's the first thing. These things about Companies House, library, bad register, whatever we want to call it, to turn that into a regulator so that when someone registers a company, they name the directors as, you know, I'll make this up, you know, Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun, and it's called Crooked Crook Limited, that actually raises a few flags and that we do something about that. Then there are recommendations within the Russia report, which I think should be in the bill as well. And I mentioned some of those in my remarks, but there were a number of recommendations in that report. And then you've got the failure to prevent offence. These are all candidates for inclusion in the report. The other thing I just want to mention about this broadly, which isn't specifically to do with the bill, is part of the context of this is we're about to have lots of tax increases. And it's one thing to put forward an argument for tax increases because you need to pay for public services. But it's quite a different thing if you're putting forward an argument for tax increases and there's not enough effort to track down the loss of taxpayers' money in one way or another. So I think this has become politically sharper because of the tax increases that are about to be introduced.
Thank you. Yes, I have a couple of questions specifically for Baroness Kramer, I think. One question is about your whistleblower bill. If Ian Foxley and Parisia have been working with some MPs regarding this bill, if you relay this relates to your bill. But mainly, I would like to ask. I would like to report a question from Graham Barrow. He has been doing an incredible work analyzing basically all the Companies House data. And it was mentioned by Alison actually during the urgent question, I think I recall. Graham Barrow asked, with Tom Burgess currently in London in court here in London, defending himself against an attempt to silence him and his book Lectopia, isn't some form of action against SLAPP also a necessary step?
So,
for Baroness Kramer.
Yeah, that's, I'm not that familiar with the individual case you described. So that's, but I am very conscious that there are so many ways in which whistleblowers are silenced, whether it's the UK equivalent of non-disclosure clauses, whether it's threats to their career future, whether it's pushing them constantly into litigation so that they're impoverished along with their various friends who come to their rescue. I mean, there's so much in here. And it's one of the reasons why I put forward a bill for an office of the whistleblower. And there is no pride of authorship in all of this. I'm very glad of people coming in with additional ideas or different ways to do it or whatever else. The point is, we need to get something done and we need to get it done quickly. And I think the public really respects whistleblowers, really appreciates what they do. So the public is on our side. I don't understand why the baton isn't being taken up. I think that matters. If I could just comment quickly on just one of the other issues. I mean, Kevin talked about the need to pull together enforcement agencies because it's so bitty and fragmented, but so is the policy making. If you had a representative of every department involved, the panel would be too big to be able to hold a proper webinar. And we really do need to see a minister, you know, it'd be wonderful, it could be at cabinet level, whose career is on the line to haul all of these pieces together and make this work, because it's so fundamental. You know, if you don't have a clean society, and you know, it's very hard to get respect. So I think this goes beyond just economics, and the point that PAC is making, it funnels all the way through the sort of sense of moral fibre of the nation and the way in which ordinary people are respected and treated, and how they should respond when they're asked to do things or faced with rules or regulations.
Absolutely. In terms of adopting a more coherent approach, I know that Alison, you've been quite of an advocate for a more coherent AML supervision. You talked to us about it in your thought leadership video, but would you like to explore further? What are the necessary steps? Is there something that is absolutely lacking and that we absolutely need right now?
Yeah, and I think, as I said earlier, the big gap in this is Companies House. If Companies House was an AML supervisor of some kind, that would at a sweep take out a whole area of people who are just not having any supervision at all. Because it seems to me very easy to get around AML supervision. So if you are one of the AML supervisory bodies, if one of your members of your organisation is up to no good, you can remove them from your registers. It doesn't stop them carrying out money laundering somewhere else. It just removes them from your own registers and your own level of responsibility for that organisation. So there's really no penalty for that. And some, it would appear from the figures that some of those AML supervisors aren't really doing everything that they could be doing already in terms of reporting and supervising. So again, it's a huge big gap there. And I think in terms of Companies House and some of the funding issues around that, the amount of money to register a company at £12 is absolutely ludicrously low. And to register a person, a child, for citizenship is £1,012. So the discrepancy between a person and a company and how little it costs to register a company in this country, if you were even to put up that amount, not up to the £1,012, but somewhere in between, something more reasonable than £12, you could pay for a lot of that additional work that needs to be done. And things like the economic crime levy that the government are bringing in, sure, that's fine, but that's penalising those who are already behaving themselves rather than going after the money that's being taken out of the system by crooks and criminals.
Thanks. And you mentioned Companies House obviously increasing the cost for registering a company. This has been said that it could be a possibility, to use this as a budget, to fund Companies House. But Pat also mentioned taxation. Kevin, we have a question from the audience that says, what budget would you see appropriate for tackling this issue? I'm assuming the issue is economic crime, and where should that money come from?
Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly clear exactly how much we spend already, but it's I think I saw a figure about £850 million a year, but it's been estimated, well, money laundering alone is about 100 billion a year in the UK, and I think collectively, I think Spotlight on Corruption have suggested the cost to the UK is about £250 billion. So a lot more than we've got already. That is a fact. I mean, so online fraud, for example, is 40%. For fraud is 40% of all crime, but tackling fraud has a budget of 1% of the total tackling crime budget. So it's just not right. We just got the priorities wrong at the moment. There's a gradual understanding this is the case, but I go back to this point that's often missed in this conversation, though, is the key thing is getting the evidence in the first place. And I think something like 43% of all the evidence in financial crime investigations comes from whistleblowers. So if you don't do the whistleblowers, you won't get the evidence. If you don't get the evidence, you can't prosecute the crime. And the Serious Fraud Office, I'm afraid, have a pretty poor record in prosecuting crime in the UK, A, because of resources, B, because of information, and C, because of the legislation just isn't there. There's a very obscure principle, the identification principle, that is so difficult to prove in the UK. So the Serious Fraud Office wants to see this failure to prevent offence, which is with the Law Commission. That will report till June. We very much hope it'll be in this bill. What the failure to prevent offence does, we've already got it for bribery and for tax evasion, but what we need it for is economic crime. So it says to the leaders of large companies, okay, if you don't put the checks and balances in place to stop this stuff, money laundering, then you're going to be criminally liable. Your company is, and perhaps an individual too. That's what will really focus the attention of people. So I think it's kind of a bit of a chicken and egg situation. It's a raft of solutions. It is the legislation, it is the resources, but it's also the information. All those things need to be tackled. We can't just move one dial and expect this to be resolved. It's all the things we mentioned and more. But the key thing is, somebody made the point to me once, the Security and Exchange Commission in the US, which prosecutes financial crime, of course, over there, it was tiny until they introduced whistleblower legislation and suddenly expanded all recognition, because suddenly they're getting the information where they can prosecute the crimes and collect huge fines, of course, huge fines. We talk about this money. Airbus was fined $3 billion for their bribery offences. $3 billion, of which the UK Treasury got 860 million quid. So, which is the total budget for tackling this fraud. So this is a massive payback with this. But we've got to be prepared to invest in it and make sure we invest time in the legislation and all the other protections that we need.
Thanks. I think that when talking about whistleblowing, Susan, you mentioned in a recent interview that there is this need for the public to actually understand the importance and why it should be given a priority. Do you think that is the same case for economic crime? Do you think that the public, and I mean both public and also the government, do understand the importance of economic crime? Have we as civil society, but also do you think that everybody has done enough to spread awareness?
Well, I mean, I think the public totally gets it, quite frankly. I think they're outraged by the idea that people who can play the system and, can manage to get accountants or consultants or whatever else can weave their way through the rules. I think in the same way, they have huge respect for whistleblowers and they see it as heroic, and are appalled when they hear of the retaliation that comes against them and the experience that they have. I think the public is absolutely, frankly, in the right place. And, to follow up on the points that Kevin was making, if you have an effective system in place, it's a huge deterrent. The amount in the States that you talk to any of the federal prosecutors who are able to use the various tools that they have that we don't, and particularly the whistleblowing tool, they say it turns people in, you create a civilian army. And that everybody who decides they're going to commit some sort of abuse is looking over their shoulder because somebody's going to tell on them. And it's going to be taken seriously, which is, of course, one of the missing elements here in the UK. And then there's going to be an enforcement capacity. So deterrence is absolutely crucial. And of course, exactly as Kevin says, when you put in place an effective system, it more than pays for itself. In the US, the various enforcement bodies are actually profit centers because their effectiveness in reaping repayment or restitution or financial penalties is so significant that it not only pays for enforcement, it actually allows a return to their treasury. I cannot see any way in which there is a lose in this. Being effective in tackling economic crime in all of its ramifications is purely a win-win, except for the bad guys.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time, so I would like to ask a final question for everybody before we end the webinar. And the economic crime plan, it set a very ambitious agenda in 2019 to strengthen the UK system against economic crime. Whether we have achieved this over these years, this is to debate. You can check our tracker to see how we're doing. But now the economic crime plan is in its final layer. So looking forward, what do you think should be the focus of an economic crime plan to? How can we turn this vision that we need to tackle economic crime into action? I will start with Pat.
I think two things which strike me in terms of where do you want to get to with this. The first is to resist the post-Brexit temptation to allow London to be a kind of a magnet for hot money through a weakening of regulation. Now, to be fair to the big financial institutions, I don't think they're calling for that. But sometimes when I see the Treasury endlessly consulting this sector, at the moment there's lots of consultations out there, one gets the impression that the Treasury itself is on the search for a sort of post-Brexit consolation prize to give to the industry, having excluded it from the Brexit deal. So I think we need to make sure that the flip side of having a global financial centre is strong regulation and high standards, and that we don't go down the road of trying to maintain a global financial sector through weak regulation. So at the high level, I'd say that's where we want to get to. Don't allow London to be a magnet for hot money. The second thing, though, is on the consumer side. I was really struck by the figure in the Treasury Select Committee report that said this is about a third of all reported crime, but it's getting 1% of policing resources. And we all know that if we take up a fraud issue or a financial scam or something like that on behalf of one of our constituents, taking that to your local neighbourhood policing sergeant just doesn't work. They're just not really equipped to do the investigative work on this. And so I think the plethora of different organisations involved in protecting consumers here needs to be brought together in a coherent way, because at the moment, the innovation in the scams is ahead of the protection that can be offered to our constituents. And that's why this is the fastest growing rate of crime. So we need to have both of those aims in mind, a high level regulatory one, which links to the foreign policy issues that we've been discussing, and the consumer protection side. And to tackle fraud in all its dimensions, we've got to be active on both of those fronts.
Thank you. Kevin, I see you raise your hand.
Yes, do you mind? I've got to jump off. I'm sorry, I have to go. But just very quickly, despite everything Pat said, and in fact everybody said on this call today, I mean, I think Companies House reform and the Register of Overseas Entities, which deals with the ownership of UK properties, is pretty much baked in, a done deal. I think government's going to do that in the economic crime bill. We've got to make sure it does it right, but I think that's going to happen, assuming the bill's brought forward. The key things I'd be concerned that might not be in it are the failure to prevent economic crime offence, criminal liability. It is quite tough. It's with the Law Commission, but we need to get that in. So, and we will amend I'm sure we will amend the bill if it's not in there. But then again, the other thing is whistleblowers. We can't leave this out. It's got to be done at the same time, either in that bill or a kind of a parallel piece of legislation. But that's so critical to this. We cannot tackle this without proper protection of whistleblowers. They are hung out to dry at the moment in the UK, which talk about deterrence, it deters whistleblowers from coming forward with the information in the first place. So we need to make sure they're properly looked after.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I know that you have to log off, so thank you so much for attending, and also thank you very much for your work in the House. It's very, very appreciated by all of Rosie.
Thank you. My pleasure. And yours and everybody else's. Thank you.
Thank you. I will cue now to Susan, assuming that Kevin led the floor with whistleblowing. What do you think? What are your final remarks on economic crime?
Well, I don't want to repeat what everyone else has said, because I think we're very much on the same page. I mean, your question is in consensus, and you could hear that consensus here and force behind it, not just a tepid, weak consensus, but a powerful one. And what I wanted to basically say is I think what matters a great deal is tone from the top. I was struck that Boris Johnson of the government was basically arguing that crime had diminished dramatically because they were excluding fraud and white-collar crime from that calculation. And I still think there is something of this mentality that white-collar crime, fraud, whatever, are somehow lesser or have less impact or don't matter in the same way. And in our modern society, that is completely untrue. Everybody, from the poorest to the richest, is somehow engaged in the world of the white-collar sector, of the finance sector. So I think that attitude has got to change. And what we cannot see, and I've been picking it up just as I think others have sort of pat has, that this notion that, you know, we have an opportunity now to return to the animal spirits which ignited all the innovation and capabilities of London. And there's a willingness to provide a lot of leeway. I've just always felt with our incredibly successful financial services industry, it is an industry where there is a load of money washing around, and the temptations are so acute because of that. And it does mean that you really do have to take regulation and enforcement in that sector seriously, use the tools you've got, put in place the new kind of tools, but then above all, actually use them to crack down so that the message gets through. And then I think you'll see the industry responding. But at the moment, those who actually play by the rules tend to look like mugs, because those who don't play by the rules get away with it and pocket a great deal of additional money, and that has to change.
I agree. Thank you. Alison, would you like to add something?
I suppose I would also broadly agree with what everybody has said here, but you know, this economic crime bill, there's no excuse for the government. They know all the problems. The evidence is really, really clear from civil society, from evidence gathered by committee, by all of the bills that have gone in the past where things haven't been put in place. The government knows all the things that it needs to do here. There is no excuse anymore for not acting on this. And I think there's two aspects to this. There's the impact on the individuals, which can be absolutely devastating, of economic crime and fraud. People can lose their life savings. The impact of this can be devastating on their mental health as well as their financial ability to get by. And people find it obviously absolutely mortifying that they've been scammed, and it has a huge impact on people. But it also has, on the wider scale, a huge impact on our international reputation, on the UK and on Scotland's international reputation, because we need to be a place where people can trust that their money will be safe. And if we don't have that trust, and if we don't have that integrity, we have absolutely nothing at all. And there was one of the witnesses that we had at Treasury Select Committee talked about there now being a cost to finance companies of locating in the UK because of that cost of fraud. So if we don't tackle this and appear to be serious about tackling it, that does have that impact on the UK and on Scotland's international reputation. And I would just say for a tiny last point, that the Scottish Crime Campus in Gartcosh is a really good example of how you can bring organisations together on one campus to work on issues like organised crime. You can have that policing expertise in one place because we've got a single police force in Scotland, and I think it's really important that the rest of the UK learns from that model where it can be well implemented.
Thank you. I I think that there is, from this webinar, what we can get is that aside from the fact that there is obviously unanimity across Britain's political parties about the urgency of strengthening our defences, I think that we all know what should be done, right? So it's just now a matter of pushing to actually see it happening. As part of RUSI, we're looking forward to working alongside you all to turn this vision into reality. So obviously, we're looking very closely to see, first of all, the first step is ensuring that the bill is actually included in the next Queen's speech. But obviously, not only that it's included, but includes all the vital elements that we have discussed today, because there are obviously different spheres. There is the domestic sphere, there is the international sphere, there is the people, there is the structure, there is Britain's reputation. As we said, and you said multiple times, it is a huge topic, but we know what we have to do. So thank you very much all for joining us today. I really enjoyed our conversation. I saw there are loads of other questions that I'm planning on writing down, and hopefully we're going to work and look for our research to answer all these questions as well. With this, very great thanks to all our audience for joining us, and obviously for the questions here today, and your support as ever. And thanks again to our panelists, and also to the RUSI events team for the production support today. Very thank you. And of course, to hear all about the events, tomorrow we actually have one in Spanish for all the Spanish speakers on cryptocracy and democracy, how we can protect it, and another one next week on terrorism financing. But to hear more about everything that we're planning and read our commentaries, our papers as well, and to hear more in general about what we do at RUSI CFCS, do please follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, basically all social media, and sign up to our CFCS mailing list that you can find on the RUSI's mains website. Finally, if you have yet to discover our super amazing podcast series, do please search for the Suspicious Transaction Report, wherever you get your podcasts, and to revisit all the audio versions of previous events, including this one, subscribe to our podcast series, the Financial Crime Insights. It was seriously a great pleasure to share today's event. Until next time, have a good day.